Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. I'm joined today by Michael Ioffe, who's the founder of a company called Arist, who's doing really interesting work. He's also a Teal Fellow. He's been named Forbes 30 Under 30. The list literally goes on, but we're going to dispense with the amenities. Michael, welcome to Trending in Education.
Thanks so much. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, you're already a serial entrepreneur, which is a credit to you in terms of your, I was going to say prodigiousness. What is a prodigy's, like the noun form of a prodigy, the abstract concept, but the fact that you've been able to kind of like crack the code a little bit in terms of getting things done. We're going to want to get into all that, but I'd love to hear it. I think our listeners too, in your own words, how do you tell your story these days? How did you get to this point?
So I've been obsessed with education for as long as I can remember. My parents are both refugees, and education was pretty critical in their ability to, build a great life for our family. And I became obsessed with entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship education when I was 15. I wanted to become an entrepreneur. There were no real educational resources about entrepreneurship back then. So I ended up convincing like a dozen local business leaders in Portland, where I grew up, to do a series of free live conversations. So sort of hosting these live conversations in a basement of a theater in Portland. Very quickly, we got over 1,000 people attending, started scaling that model of like free live conversations with entrepreneurs to about 500 cities and 50 countries by the time I was 18.
Wow.
And one of our locations was in the war zone in Yemen. And what I couldn't understand was, why was our location in Yemen in a war zone getting more people attending these events than our location in Portland or LA or New York?
Right.
What I started realizing was that in Yemen, educational resources were incredibly limited, right? But there was a huge demand for learning. There was no internet access. So you couldn't take a video course. You couldn't be there, couldn't send people there. And at some point we realized that, the best way to deliver learning in a place like Yemen is via text message. And so with a few professors at Harvard and Babson College to build the first text message course, was unbelievably effective. Like we saw unbelievable completion rates, engagement rates. And we realized that like if you meet people where they are and make learning digestible and conversational size, everything gets better. Like for the past, in the past few decades, we've forced people to go somewhere to learn. We've forced people to go to a platform, to a classroom. And what we're obsessed with is like, let's just meet people where they are. Let's bring learning.
Right. Which is amazing from my perspective, the analogy to refugees, which is, it's amazing that I can make a joke about this, but is like parents. So like as the parent of a student who's going to school, all the apps are communicating through text. And like the more direct it is, the more close it is to just an SMS to like me, like a message directly to me through the texting apps that I'm using in my day to day. That's how they handle like the critical communication to parents of young kids. So it makes sense in terms of like the context. And what's been interesting about that, and I've talked about this with a bunch of folks on this podcast, is like the way in which constraints can actually drive innovation, and the idea that this can be developed in a very challenging context, but then that context is much more widely relevant. It's come up around universal design for learning, where, the example of like curb cuts, they're designed for people in wheelchairs, but then a parent with a stroller, or me after a few too many drinks at happy hour, like there are times when the accommodations and the ways you build things for one population actually become more broadly relevant. I'm sure like both COVID and then the advent of these large language models and chat-based AI, that's happened since you really founded Arist. Can you talk to me about like that aspect of what you've seen? Because that's got to be it's almost like you were ahead of a lot of these transformational waves. Must be an interesting vantage point.
I think we realized back in 2019 that two things were going to be true. Right. One was that, we would end up in a situation where the majority of workplace communication happened in messaging tools. Right. Slack was beginning to do really well. And like, it was sort of becoming clear that was where things were going. At the same time, we got lucky in the sense that we got an early preview to GPT-3 back in 2020. And we started realizing that like, these models are only going to get better. Right. Like then they were like pretty decent at creating like, pieces of information.
Sure.
And going to get dramatically better. And it was perfect, right? Like imagine you could create learning using AI and then deliver it to the right person where they are. That's like the holy grail.
Frictionless.
Completely frictionless for both the creator and the
Yeah. The data center might need to crunch a few calculations, but there's plenty of that going on these days. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was kind of our core realization was that, yeah, like we kind of like saw where the puck was going. And so that like every other platform was tied to videos as a delivery mechanism.
Right.
They were not going to be able to move quickly with AI.
Mm-hmm. I immediately want to call you the Wayne Gretzky of learning, which hopefully you would take as a compliment. Skating to where the puck is going, like being out ahead of trends, because then, once you go text-based for learning, to your point, like the native environment, like the home turf of the LLMs, of AI, the AI revolution that we're in the midst of is through text messages. There's been a lot of sort of building around that sort of core. But that's the other element where maybe more from a instructional design perspective, there are constraints built into text. How have you sort of thought through that? Also, like this is, I guess, a classic example of microlearning too, right? Because text, they're like very like atomic units in terms of each message is only like a limited amount of information that gets pushed. How has that side of things worked?
So a few things that we think about often is conciseness forces clarity, right? So if you ask a learning designer and you ask them to explain, or a subject matter expert, and you're like, hey, I want you to explain neuroscience or like a neuroscience concept to me.
Yeah.
The natural inclination of any teacher or learning designer is going to be to give a lot of content, right? And to explain as much as possible. Which is not really how learning happens, right? Learning happens when you have like a bite-sized piece of information that like read, understand, digest, and practice. Move on to the next piece of information. And it doesn't, I think one of our challenges with microlearning as a term is that it connotes that something is less than, right? It connotes that is like less important or less significant. From a view, it's not microlearning necessarily, right? It's like we're still conveying the same amount of information and we're still getting people to the same outcome. The difference is that we're just being very intentional at every part. We're going to teach you this. We're going to understand it. Then we're going to give you this, and we're going to slowly give you, like, we think
you're chunking. It's like your working memory, right? Like you want to get people say bite-sized. It's like, eventually when we chew and eat food, it is small enough to get into our esophagus, right? So like there is, at the end of the day, the learning, either it happens prior to delivery or it happens by the learner themselves getting it into their brains. But like there is an element of right sizing the information to get it into something that I can consume, digest, process. In this sense, the constraints of text messaging is forcing your sort of instructional operation to kind of be small to begin with, which makes it easier for the end user to process.
Exactly. The way we think about it is that instead of giving somebody a rock, we're giving them a ton of grains of sand, right? Yeah. And
they're not eating them though, right? Like this we're not supporting eating sand, just for our listeners. We're talking metaphorically. And then how do you think about the voice of the instruction, which is another thing that, I worked at Kaplan Test Prep, started as a test prep teacher, which is really kind of more of a coach or a tutor. And then I wound up writing e-learning for Kaplan. So like there is a way in which you decide how much voice you add versus how much you treat this as sort of canon. It's like the voice of God. It's written in a way that is just sort of very declarative. How do you think about style and like authorial voice when you start using things like AI to develop your content?
So making it feel really human matters a lot, right? So we've trained sort of Arist to be very conversational, use emojis thoughtfully, right? Like concise to the point, and just like explain concepts the way that humans explain them, right? Like we a lot through conversations. And so if we mimic that, then we're like in the best spot possible.
Yeah. And then you're using like something proprietary on the back end, or you're using one of the main transformer LLMs that are out there?
A mix. A mix of custom data and sort of custom workflows and like custom agents with like best in class LLMs.
Got it. And then so like there are, the what is it, retrieval augmented generate, like the RAG technologies and like other technologies out there to kind of like guard against confabulation, because that is just as an aside, yesterday I was playing around with Gemini
Yeah.
and its ability to take a picture of something and, give me information based on that. So on the one hand, on the pro side, I took a picture of this hive that appeared on the balcony outside of our apartment here and asked Gemini to, you know, describe what type of
Yeah.
bee, what type of insect was in there. And it turns out they're bald-faced hornets.
Yeah.
And they look like beetles. And I was ready to kind of like self-help, just kind of like knock the thing off. And like all it says is like, whatever you do, don't do this, seek professional help, So check mark on the positive use case. But then flip side, me and my 6-year-old go to the library. We pick up Where's Waldo, and we're stuck on a board. So I take a picture just as a test for Gemini to like help me find Waldo in here. And Gemini is insistent but wrong that Waldo's counterpart, his alter ego, his like evil twin, Oddlaw, is actually Waldo. And in that case, Gemini is insistent that I'm wrong to the point that I eventually had to find, like on a Reddit board, the actual correct answer. I'm a 2025 human. I know how to cheat effectively. Like, I'm not going to stay using the wrong cheating algorithm to get me the information I need. But the fact is, Gemini was just insistent. And I actually, and I'm not throwing shade on Gemini. I'm riding and dying with Gemini for the time being. But like, it's not, these things aren't really reliable, and you do actually have to build in checks, especially when you use something new and cutting edge, like a creative use case. The other thing I've been saying, someone else said this and I love it, is like Gen AI is mid, no cap. Yeah. See, like that's because you're Gen Z. I'm trying to be relevant there. It's almost like you have to stay in the leadership position in terms of how you're making decisions about using these tools. I'd love to get a little bit of your thinking on like, how do you actually engage with this emerging capability set that's both transformational, but also something you have to kind of manage carefully?
Yeah, totally. I think it comes down to sort of the infrastructure and stitching that you build around it, right? So for us, we spend a lot of time thinking about like, how do you do, for example, like one of our most popular features is automated referencing, right? How do you have like a mini agent that goes out and references every claim to figure out what's true and what's not, right? So a lot of what makes good AI tools, because LLMs can do a lot, but a lot of what makes good AI tools is like, how do you stitch things together with other tools? It's kind of the big focus.
Yeah,
the infrastructure and stitching that really matters.
And then I guess also like the learning in the flow of work and being able to be responsive to emerging needs like AI literacy and other rapidly developing skills that are critical to being effective in the workplace. Arist has been kind of uniquely positioned in some ways to get out ahead of skills disruption and offer that to enterprise. Can you walk us through how that's been going? That seems like a pretty important part of the story as well.
It is, yeah. So I think one of the things that we find is that, we have a client, they're actually very public about this, Wolters Kluwer, where, they have 30,000 employees, one of the largest, sort of IT and services companies in the world. They wanted to upskill everybody on AI and data literacy, and using their existing tools, it would have taken them 6 months to build all of the content. Right?
Yeah.
With Arist, one of the benefits of AI and learning in the flow of work is that you can build courses immediately and push them immediately, right? So as things change in the real world, and with AI, new models are coming out every week. As things change in the real world, you can actually push the right info to the right people ASAP.
Yeah, right.
I think that's something that people just, don't think about as often. Speed really matters in learning. And with AI, if it takes you 40 hours to build a course and another 2 hours to take it and, months to get people to engage, like you're down on the urgency of getting info to people quickly.
Right. How does this relate to job design and the types of roles that you would envision as we start looking a little further ahead? Let's say this stuff continues to grow, the LLMs get better, your special sauce, and frictionless learning in the flow of work becomes transformational. How does that, I'm trying to figure out the alternative of Black Mirror. Like Roger Spitz, friend of the show, futurist, he likes to talk about the Black Mirror effect, where we tend to think about technology futures and science fiction through a dystopian lens, where frequently it can sort of flip us out of a scarcity dynamic into an abundance one. But then that's where frequently our future thinking creativity kind of dies down, because we're like, I don't really know what that would then mean. As someone who's been living this and has been successful in kind of transformational learning enterprises, learning ventures over the last, 5+ years that have been very transformational.
Yeah.
What are some positive scenarios that you see for like how things get transformed? And then how does that relate to what people actually do for work in the future?
Yeah, totally. So I think a few things are going to happen. One is that, everyone's going to be able to get the right information at the right place at the right time. So people are going to perform way better, which is awesome, right?
And then you're thinking to that end, the challenge I hear is around like epistemic security. Like, how are we going to actually know that the information is good and that it's reliable? I guess that's where you come in to some extent, right? Like where you're vetted and accountable to the enterprises you're serving. So like if you're not delivering reliable information, they're going to stop using you, go elsewhere, et cetera.
Definitely. Yeah. So incentives along well there. And that's also where humans play a role, right? Like I think humans will move away from creating content to verifying, creating it, managing it.
Curating it, right? Like I've heard more talk of like curation, and even like it's hard to teach AI's taste.
Yeah.
Which I thought was an interesting note.
Yeah. Like the reality is that if you want to do something truly best in class, you still need humans, right? Like still need humans. And the nice part is that with AI, humans are able to do truly best in class work 20 times faster, right? Because all of the stuff that like takes away from doing best in class work is like the drudgery and like the not the fun stuff, right?
Right. And then how about multimedia? Because it is interesting in that, you've designed, again, going old school lingo, but it's almost like a very like thin client in terms of what you're delivering through. Not a lot of rich media. I guess interactive is the one sort of benefit of text, is that it is an exchange, and we're all sort of being trained into like the chat dialogue as sort of like a root way of interacting with everything. So I guess that is an upside, but it's also the age of the TikToks, Michael. It's the age of, sticky media. I would imagine in the future of learning, there will always be a little bit of that. And how does that pair then with text-based in the flow of work? How do you think about those kinds of integrations?
Yeah, totally. I think a common misconception is that if it's in the flow of work, it has to be like very bare bones. Arist courses are incredibly dynamic, and this is true for any in the flow of work experience, right? We can embed videos, we can embed images, we can embed podcasts, we can embed audio, we can embed.
Oh, wait, hang on. I'm hearing you can embed podcasts.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Okay, now I'm paying attention. Now you got my attention. Thank you.
Yeah. So we can embed any multimedia, and you're right. There's a lot of interactivity. It's very conversational. So all of that's still doable, right? It's just that instead of delivering it in an hour-long block somewhere else, we're meeting people where they are.
Got it. And I'm a big Ethan Mollick fan. His book, Co-Intelligence, is awesome. Like, it's on our summer reading list, Michael. Everyone's got to check out Trending Ahead summer reading list. That episode went out earlier this summer. But, one of the things he talks about is that you kind of want to be the human in the loop these days. You want to actually be the person who's interfacing with the design of this stuff. Future Proof's Kevin Roos's book was also on the list. He wrote it in 2021, but it was talking about, I think it's like 9 suggestions, 9 tips for people to sort of stay ahead of the transformation that we're in the midst of. He similarly was sort of arguing for tactics that allow people to be relevant. One thing he talks about is the importance of handprints, the idea that there was an actual human touch on a product, and to be a human who could sort of engage directly with the workflow to add value. Put differently, he was saying you don't want to be an endpoint. You don't want to be someone who's sort of connecting an API call from one automated system to another, the example of like an Uber driver. What kind of advice do you have for folks? And maybe this is where we can get a little into the generational conversation. People tell me I'm Gen X, and I say, whatever, man, because that's what Gen X people do. But, you're, I guess, folks would say Gen Z, right? And there's a lot of talk about generations. I'd say on the enterprise side, on the organizational side, Gen Z's been getting beat up a little bit in the media about how you're not really job ready. Is your advice to Gen Z to start your own company? Like, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I think Gen Z wants what everybody else wants, but they have a lower tolerance for BS, right? And so I think what that translates to in terms of organizations is that whereas, historically people may have put up with, certain policies within an enterprise, Gen Z just won't put up with it, right?
Yeah.
I think there's tons of very, very talented, Gen Z colleagues that I know, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, like management needs to change a bit, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Simply management needs to change to be more to the point, more direct, like not fake. One of my favorite examples of this is like there's tons of these like initiatives that companies have, right? Like a lot of like CSR initiatives, for example.
Corporate social responsibility, right? Yeah.
Corporate social responsibility that really are performative, right? That don't actually translate to any real impact. Not all of them, but
Yeah.
and Gen Z sees straight through that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. I think it's a place where Gen X and Gen Z can get along because I feel like Gen X was sort of the first, not the first, but we were pretty well known for kind of not selling out is the highest virtue for our generation. And then nothing against millennials, but then there was another generation in the middle. And now it almost feels like Gen Z's kind of coming around to that thinking, which I think is certainly interesting. And then I guess the related point is what kind of experience can young folks get nowadays and how do they get that foot in the door? And that's where, maybe we can get a little into the Teal Fellowship, which I know has been a little bit controversial over the years in that, it's almost designed as an alternative to college that sort of opens up entrepreneurial pathways. And you're an example of the success of that idea. Thoughts on that and how maybe that relates to being smart about managing your future or your children's future when you're thinking about really kind of getting a career started and getting ahead in a really complex world.
what we look for when we hire people is, are they best in class at something, right?
Mm.
Or can they learn something very quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And school doesn't teach that, right? Like when taking a microbiology class is not going to teach you to get very good at learning things quickly, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, the Teal Fellowship, I think, is very, very effective at presenting an alternative, right? I think we need more alternatives, right? Like I think college it's a social club, right? And I went to school for 2 years, right?
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It was a really great time. I run a company. I went to an entrepreneurship school. I don't anything that I learned from college to run my company, right?
Right.
Nothing. Like there is no substitute for experience. One of the great things about AI is it can help you get really good really quickly on anything that you want, right?
Right.
Missing is agency. Like the thing that I find fascinating is that today we have all of these incredible tools to teach us anything quickly. You can ask ChatGPT any question. Like I asked it a complicated graph theory question and we repeated on graph theory for a few hours and like it was awesome. The limit is actually what we can ask. Like the limit is like what humans can ask, right? And that's kind of interesting to me.
I'm here with Michael Ioffe. We're having an amazing conversation, hit on a number of different interesting themes from your background, what got you started on education, your parents as refugees, and then some of the constraints in Yemen leading to some insights around Arist and what you're doing around enterprise education. So much covered already. Good job by us. What have we not talked about? Anything else you wanted to make sure we hit on before we wrap up?
I think the number one thing that we think about when it comes to how AI is going to change education is the fact that I think historically, especially for the past like decade or two, a lot of education has been focused on building skills, right? And it's on like, hey, how can we get these people to become good data scientists, right? How can we get them to become good engineers or good at, management, et cetera?
Right.
I think what we have to change to is outcomes, right? How do we get somebody to a specific outcome? Or how do we get somebody to sort of build agency as a primary skill so they can use all of these AI tools to do what they want to do? Just to give you an example, in my free time, I run a program for high school students in New York called Foundation, which is essentially we, give high school students 6 hours every Sunday and unlimited resources to pursue a project of their choice. What's been consistently interesting is that we have a lot of students that come in that have never learned how to code, have no clue like how to code or do anything. And, historically what we'd have done is we'd have been like, great, let's put you in a 3-month coding boot camp and teach you how to code. With
Right.
AI tools, we just tell them, hey, ask ChatGPT how to build the app that you want. And ChatGPT will walk you through step by step how to code it. You don't need to learn how to code. All you need to learn about is how to get to the right outcome, right?
Right.
And that's what's changing, right? The thing that I worry about is that I see a lot of organizations that are obsessed with building skills and tracking skills and measuring skills. When what matters is just like, how do we get this individual to the outcome that they want or to the outcome that the business wants? And that's what AI tools are really good at. That's like at Arist, we focus exclusively on outcomes. We've ignored skills entirely, and we think skills are more or less a way of the past.
Interesting. So then this is kind of a corollary, I guess, to the vibe coding movement. There's almost like an education transformation that we're starting to see, which is maybe moving past the skills-based thinking and into something new. I guess it requires a level of what I've heard described as executive function. And, you were talking about agency, and that is frequently a critique, I think, around Gen Z is that, maybe they understand notionally like some of their purpose, some of their why, but they don't really know how to kind of activate. And then the flip side of that is perhaps organizations don't really know how to tap into that drive. Any advice for organizations? I know you work with folks all the time. Any suggestions on how to kind of grapple with that, how to successfully navigate that complexity?
Everybody needs to keep in mind that agency is the number one skill, right? Like there's only one skill that matters in the age of AI, and it's agency. Can you figure out what you need to do to accomplish the outcome that you want, right? And can you figure out what outcome you care about and like what you actually are trying to achieve? The challenge is that schools are not built to teach agency. They're built to teach skills. And you end up in a situation where a student starts believing that to achieve something, they first need to go to college or they first need to achieve this skill, right? And that we're actually like through our current education system encoding the belief that there are barriers before you can achieve something, which is not true, right? The reality is like you can do anything. Like as a student, you can just ask ChatGPT like, hey, I want to start an ice cream store. How do I do that? You don't need a business degree, right? You just ask GPT how to do it. So if I was running an educational institution, the number one thing that I'd be focused on is like, how do we help Gen Z in particular learn agency as a skill and teach agency? I mean, there's a magical thing that happens with students when you tell them, and we see this at Arist in our courses as well, when you tell them like, this is the outcome that I'm going to help you achieve. And even though you don't believe that you're going to be able to achieve this outcome, by the end of this basic series of steps, you will achieve this. And then they achieve it and they're like, oh my God, I didn't realize that I could do this. People are capable of far more than even they think they are capable of. It's just that we, from an educational point of view, we artificially limit our students by putting up blockers, right? That's the main problem from my point of view.
Yeah, it does immediately lead me to Steve Jobs and his reality distortion field, where you can get people to believe in themselves. They can do amazing things. Before we wrap up, maybe a little more thinking about the role of the teacher then, or the role of the leader or the instructor. There's a lot of talk about durable skills and the fact that we need to, again, on the skills framework. So I'm falling into the trap a bit, but what do we need perhaps on the leadership side? What's the evolution there? What's a good mental model, I guess, for interacting with folks in a way that helps them thrive?
I think the role of a teacher is going to shift to becoming curator and facilitator and mentor more than teacher, right? And I think most of the knowledge and most of the step-by-step guidance will happen with AI, and AI is very good at doing that in a personalized manner. Like Alpha School is an example here, right? The role of the teacher becomes helping students figure out what is it that they want to achieve, right? And having those hard conversations of like, what is it that you deeply care about and want to achieve? And then from there, helping students like get the resources and the mentorship and the guidance and pushing them a bit to be even more ambitious, right? Like that's really the role of the teacher is like, how do you push students to become as ambitious as possible versus, hey, I'm going to teach you chemistry. No. The teacher should instead be like, hey, what is the most interesting and ambitious chemistry project that you as a student could do that will help you, like achieve something interesting? And how do we help you achieve that? That's the real question.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned Alpha School. I talked to Mike Yates at the Reinvention Lab for Teach for America, And he was talking about, rather than AI literacy, AI dexterity, which is the ability to use AI in service of a cause, some objective to your some outcome for yourself, for your community, for your organization, I guess in some cases. And it does, make me think a little bit about critical thinking and maybe a deeper dive into what's necessary to be AI literate or AI dexterous in the case of dexterity. What do you think it takes? What's missing for folks?
The thing that consistently comes up at Arist, right, is that, look, if you are an employee at a Fortune 500 company, or if you are a student with a ChatGPT Pro license, you have access to more knowledge and more capability than like anybody's ever had in human history, right? You have access to like, the equivalent, like a good example is I asked ChatGPT this like really complex graph theory question, right?
Yeah.
Good, right? It was so good at giving me a really detailed answer and walking me through step by step, right? The limit becomes the questions that people ask.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the limit becomes your ability to ask really hard and interesting questions. So what's funny is that as models develop and as models become exponentially better, like most humans, most Americans, right, are asking ChatGPT really basic questions. The limit is us, not the model, right? The number one thing that we can do to increase AI dexterity is to help people ask better, smarter, and more interesting questions of these models, right?
Mm-hmm.
To up our ambition, right? Keep pushing our ambition higher.
I love that. And I'm a big believer in human work in the future is going to become obviously more AI enabled, but also I'm imagining more entrepreneurial. I would hope that there is sort of a, 1,000 points of light, to use the old term or phrase, around like more bottom up generative, kind of like almost like the creator economy. Like now there's a more empowered capability there where rather than just, kind of goofing around on TikTok, you could actually build something that could solve real problems.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff here with Michael Ioffe. The company's called Arist. He's doing interesting things. We're going to include links to all this in the show notes. As folks head back to the rest of their lives, Michael, concluding thoughts, some takeaways?
Number one concluding thought is just focus on agency, right? Focus on how you can make people more agentic and really use AI as much as you possibly can and push the limits of what the AI tools can do. And the number one most important thing, which we at Arist are obsessed about, is meet people where they are, right? If you have the world's greatest content, but it lives 20 clicks away from where somebody spends their time, you're not going to get the outcomes that you want. So meet people where they are, bring learning to people, focus on agency, and you'll have incredible educational outcomes.
Amazing stuff with Michael Ioffe. I hadn't heard of the agentic thing turned around for humans. So I'm going to take that away from this conversation where there's a lot of talk about building agents, but the agents we really have to build is human agency, probably first and foremost. Michael, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Thank you. So thrilled to be here, and thanks for taking the time.
All right. And for our listeners, if you like what you heard, please subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.